So Zhilei Zhang ices Deontay Wilder in 5 rounds. Let's talk about it. Now, I was leaning towards Zhilei Zhang going into this fight for several reasons, but one of the main ones was because Deontay Wilder's energy seemed off. And let me specify what I mean by energy. I'm talking about the mental and emotional state that the fighter is projecting through their body language, their words, and their actions. All right, that's what I mean by energy. Wilder's energy seemed off going into the Joseph Parker fight and during the fight itself, and it seemed even more off at the kickoff press conference to announce this 5v5 card when Wilder turned up as the captain of Team Matchroom. I mentioned this in several videos at the time. Deontay Wilder has hated Eddie Hearn for years. Probably still does hate him. And although it was completely irrational of Deontay Wilder to hate Eddie Hearn because he had no good reason to, in his mind he had good reason because the people around him had poisoned his mind. And Deontay Wilder is, or at least was, a very prideful person. Very, very prideful. And so for him to be signing with Eddie Hearn, albeit for one fight, that to me showed that he'd actually had to swallow his pride. And therefore his pride must have shrunk down to a size small enough to facilitate that. The way I saw it, it's like Wilder had basically given up because he's now signed with a guy who he absolutely hates, who he's hated for years. See, some people might see it as a sign of maturity, but personally, I didn't see it that way. I don't think Wilder really has matured to any great extent. I just think he feels down about himself now and felt that way, as I say, coming into the Zhang fight. He turned up at that kickoff press conference and he looked like a shell of a man to me. His hair was all thin and on top all of a sudden. Even Eddie Hearn spoke about when he first met Deontay Wilder after signing him that Wilder seemed deflated and he had to cheer him up or attempt to cheer him up. And Deontay made his best effort to try and attempt to look confident coming into this fight, to attempt to look like the old Deontay. But it was just an act. It never seemed convincing to me. His old spirit just was not there anymore. And what made Deontay Wilder so dangerous in the past wasn't just his punching power, it was his fighting spirit. In fact, his fighting spirit is what fueled his punching power. He would put every ounce of his fighting spirit into every right hand that he threw. But as his spirit has diminished, his power has subsequently diminished as well. Now, Wilder has always been technically poor, and Zhilei Zhang has always been technically sound, so fighting spirit or no fighting spirit, this was always going to be a dangerous fight for Deontay Wilder. During Wilder's reign as WBC heavyweight champion, they hyped up people like Luis Ortiz to be much better and much more dangerous than he actually was. I said long ago that Alexander Povetkin was better than Luis Ortiz. Better amateur, better pro, beat better people. And I also said Zhilei Zhang is better than Luis Ortiz ever was. Again, better amateur, better pro. Unlike Luis Ortiz, well, Povetkin was an Olympian, obviously, a gold medalist. Zhilei Zhang was also an Olympian. Luis Ortiz never was. You look at Ortiz's professional wins. Luis Ortiz never beat anyone as good as Joe Joyce. And of course, Zhilei Zhang, a lot bigger than Luis Ortiz. Physically stronger and hits harder. And also a southpaw, of course. So this was always going to be a difficult task for any version of Deontay Wilder. But this current version of Wilder was especially vulnerable. And he knew it. Wilder fought scared in there. You know, I often talk about the psychological effects of a knockout defeat. Well, Wilder clearly hasn't gotten over the psychological effects of that third Fury fight. And this is something that fans often underestimate. They see a guy getting knocked out and they think, oh, he can just bounce back. Not understanding that when a fighter gets knocked out, they're often left with demons in their conscious and subconscious mind that plague them. And there's often also neurological effects that they suffer from a bad knockout. Bouts of dizziness, confusion, memory loss, and these things can persist over a number of months. And another thing that can happen, it doesn't always happen, but it often does, is the fighter can have a dramatic decrease in their punch resistance following a really bad knockout. Now, for some fighters, this subsides after a few weeks or a few months, but some fighters are stuck with it for the remainder of their career. Something happens to them neurologically whereby they just can't take punches anymore after being knocked out badly. And when the fighter realizes this in the gym, they become extremely gun shy, typically. And so maybe that's what happened to Deontay Wilder after that third Tyson Fury fight. He was spooked by being knocked out like that, the symptoms that come with it, the psychological baggage that comes with it. Maybe he realized in the gym that he couldn't take the same kind of punch that he could take before. Not that Deontay Wilder ever had an iron chin, but yeah, Wilder, when he came back against Joseph Parker, obviously he had the Hellenius fight and that was a nothing fight, but when he came back in his first real fight against Joseph Parker, he was scared to get hit, boxing on the back foot, moving away. There was none of that old fire in Deontay Wilder. Now, people talk about the ayahuasca session that he was constantly banging on about, and perhaps that had an effect on his psychology too. Maybe it didn't help. But I have to imagine that the biggest effect on his mindset was from that third Tyson Fury fight. Because that third Tyson Fury fight shattered Deontay Wilder's delusion once and for all. There were no more psychological crutches for him after that. He was forced to confront reality. And that hurt his confidence. So as I say, in the Parker fight, he was a shell of a man. And in this Zhilei Zhang fight, he was a shell of a man. From the opening bell, he was scared. And it's not just the fact that he wasn't letting his right hand go, because even a prime Deontay Wilder had fights where he was very low volume. We all remember the second Luis Ortiz fight where he barely threw a punch up until, what was it, the 7th round when he knocked Ortiz out. There was also the Artur Szpilka fight years before that where he was very low volume as well until he knocked Szpilka out in about the 10th round. And of course, both of those guys, like Zhilei Zhang, southpaws. But the energy that he exuded in the Szpilka fight and both Ortiz fights was very, very different to the energy he was exuding in the Zhilei Zhang fight. The look in his eye was different. In the second Ortiz fight, Wilder had this intense look in his eyes. Even though he wasn't throwing any punches, he was still looking like he meant business. Whereas against Zhang, he just looked scared to death to me. The first time Zhang managed to pin him in a corner, I think it was in the second round, Wilder just covered up while Zhang opened up. And he wouldn't even move out of the corner or clinch. He just covered up and he was trying to bob and weave. And so when he got back to his corner after that round, Malik Scott, his trainer, told him something like, you can't just stand there like a punching bag for this guy. Deontay Wilder's instincts had all gone. The fire had all gone. The few right hands that he did throw had no power on him. Again, because as I said earlier on, as his fighting spirit has diminished, so his power has diminished. He just doesn't throw the right hand with the same conviction anymore. His corner between the 4th and 5th round tried to psych him up. And indeed, he came out for the 5th, trying to be more aggressive, trying to throw more punches. He opened up with the right hand a little bit, but again, it was not the right hand of old. Zhilei Zhang didn't seem bothered by it whatsoever. I think one of them partially connected. Zhang was actually happy that Deontay Wilder was opening up because he knew it would lead to an opportunity to land some clean counters. And that's exactly what happened. Deontay Wilder, not being a very good technical fighter, leaves himself more vulnerable than most when he opens up. As Deontay was going to throw a right hand, Zhang caught him with his own right hand from the southpaw position, a right hook, which landed right in the middle of Deontay Wilder's face and spun him around. Wilder was gone, dazed and confused. It was actually shades of Zab Judah against Costa Tszyu, the way he appeared to try and complain to the ref. That's how out of it he was. And of course, Zhilei Zhang followed up with another right hand that flattened Deontay. Head bounced off the canvas as he fell. And I have to say, it was quite incredible that after going down so hard, Deontay managed to make it to his feet before the count of 10. That was incredible. But he was obviously in no fit state to continue, and the referee did the right thing in calling a halt to the bout. Deontay appeared to be complaining to his team. I think he complained to the referee a little bit as well about the stoppage, but there were certainly no complaints from anyone else, including Deontay's corner. Deontay had never been in with a puncher as big as Zhilei Zhang in his whole career. And when you're still suffering the negative effects of a devastating knockout defeat, that's obviously a recipe for disaster. And indeed, disaster struck here. A lot of people are calling for Deontay Wilder to retire now. And in fact, before the fight, Deontay himself said that if he lost to Zhang, he would retire. Let's see if he sticks to his word. If he decides to continue, I think the thing for him to do would be to drop down to bridgerweight. Because at bridgerweight, he's at least going to have the height and reach over most of his opponents. And they're not going to be any heavier than he is, or at least not much heavier than he is. Because he did weigh well under the bridgerweight limit for this fight with Zhang. The bridgerweight limit is 224 pounds. Wilder was something like 214 or 215 pounds for the Zhang fight. So as I say, if he wants to continue, it has to be at bridgerweight, in my opinion. And even then, he could still get beat. Let's be real. But he's in with more of a fighting chance, I would say. He also needs to fire his whole team. All all of them. Malik Scott, JD's, Shelly Finkel, Don House, get rid of all of them. He's been surrounded by yes men for far too long. You see, the three biggest mistakes that Deontay Wilder made in his career are as follows. Number one was turning down the DAZN deal. He was offered over $100 million by DAZN, which of course included a fight against Anthony Joshua. He turned that down on the advice of his team because, in my opinion, his team were looking out not for Deontay Wilder's best interests, but for the best interests of the television networks they were associated with, which were rivals of DAZN. So at the time, that would have been Fox and Showtime. Deontay turned down the DAZN deal and wound up making far less money for his next 3 fights than he would have made with DAZN. Far less money. The second big mistake was firing Mark Breland after the second Tyson Fury fight, using him as a scapegoat. Mark Breland was the best trainer Deontay Wilder ever had, and he was a man who actually cared about Deontay Wilder's safety and well-being. He was looking out for his best interests. But because Deontay was so wrapped up in his own ego, was so wrapped up in delusion, with all these yes men whispering in his ear, filling his head with absolute nonsense, Wilder couldn't see the forest for the trees. And he sacked the one guy in his training team who actually knew what he was doing, in Mark Breland. And the third big mistake was hiring Malik Scott as his new trainer. Why? Because, well, Malik Scott was a friend of Deontay for one. For two, he's somebody that Deontay actually fought and stopped in the first round. How much respect can you really have for a guy as a trainer and the stuff that he tells you when you stopped him in 1 round? Malik Scott never made any real money in his own boxing career. As Deontay Wilder's trainer, presumably he's on 10%. His first fight with Wilder was the third Fury match. Wilder would have got what? At least 10 million or something for that fight? That's 1 million for Malik Scott. That's more money than he ever earned for any fight in his own boxing career. Then there's the Robert Helenius fight. Wilder made at least a couple of million for that. So that's several $100 grand in Malik Scott's pocket. That probably equals the amount of his highest ever payday when he was fighting. Then Wilder fights Joseph Parker. Probably got 10 million for that at least. That's another million in Malik Scott's pocket. You see where I'm going with this? Malik Scott needed the money. He was never going to advise Deontay to turn down any of these fights. And he was never going to be anything other than a yes man in the gym and a yes man in Deontay's corner because he's getting a bag and he doesn't want to mess it up. That's why Malik Scott was coming out with all these ridiculous statements, saying that Deontay is the most dynamic fighter in the history of boxing and that he's got better boxing skills than Muhammad Ali. Yes, these are things that Malik Scott actually said publicly because he was pandering to Deontay's ego in order to remain in his good graces and continue getting a bag. But Deontay Wilder, being very unintelligent and foolish, was unable to see any of this, was unable to see the way that he had been manipulated by members of his own team for years. Not just Malik Scott, everybody else as well. Manipulated into doing things that were not in his best interests. And just to speak to Deontay's mindset coming into this Zhilei Zhang fight again. A few months ago, Deontay Wilder's brother, Marcellus, put a post up on social media where he accused Deontay of smashing his girlfriend. You know, Ryan Giggs style, where Ryan Giggs smashed his brother's wife? Yeah, like that. That's what Marcellus Wilder accused Deontay of doing. Now, Deontay had been in a relationship with a woman called Telly Swift. I'm not sure if that's her real name, but that's the name she goes by. She's some type of social media influencer. And, you know, I don't like going into fighters' personal lives unless I think it may affect their boxing career, and in this instance, it potentially has to some extent. But according to what it says all over the media, Deontay was previously married to a different woman, and he started having an affair with this Telly Swift individual, and that led to his marriage ending in divorce. Then he was with this Telly Swift for several years. She was at all Deontay's fights and so on. But following these allegations made by Wilder's brother Marcellus last year, rumor has it that Telly Swift left Deontay Wilder sometime in the past few months. No longer follows him on social media, has taken down pictures of them together from her Instagram page. So again, going into the Zhang fight, remember Wilder's a very emotional character. He's not the kind of guy that will just take things like that in his stride. So he's dealing with the trauma, the ghosts of the Tyson Fury knockout defeat. He's got issues with his brother. He's split up with his longtime partner who used to support him at all his fights. The energy was all wrong for him. Again, not that he would have won against Zhilei Zhang if the energy was right, because Zhang is the hardest puncher that Wilder's ever been in the ring with, and one of the best fighters that Deontay's ever been in the ring with. But the Wilder of old would have had a better chance. The Wilder of old certainly had better instincts, and he threw the right hand with a lot more conviction. But there you have it. Wilder gets knocked out in 5 by Zhilei Zhang. There can now be no doubt that his time as a top flight heavyweight is well and truly over. If there actually was any doubt even going into this fight, there's certainly no doubt now. People will look back on Deontay Wilder's career in different ways. For me, I'll certainly remember him as a very exciting fighter, a tremendous puncher, but also a big disappointment because he allowed himself to be manipulated against his own best interests and against the interests of boxing fans. His team, PBC, and Tyson Fury colluded to freeze Anthony Joshua out and sell this idea to the public that Fury and Wilder were the 2 best heavyweights in the world, and Anthony Joshua was basically irrelevant. That actually robbed boxing fans of the Joshua-Wilder fight when they were both in their prime, and it would have been for undisputed. He instead chose to turn that down and fight a guy that didn't even have a belt. And many people believe, even now, that Joshua was a better stylistic matchup for Deontay Wilder than Tyson Fury was. I'm not saying that that was necessarily the case, but many people believe that. And I guess we'll never find out. But certainly it would have been exciting, and certainly it would have made Deontay a heck of a lot more money than the Tyson Fury trilogy did. So above anything else, I will remember Deontay Wilder's career as a cautionary tale. Wilder's team thought they were being smart. They protected him his whole career, cherry-picked fights for him as WBC champion. When Tyson Fury came back in 2018, they thought that Fury was food after losing all that weight. Didn't look particularly impressive against Sefer Safiri or Pianeta. They fancied Deontay would just go in there and chin him early. That's why they took the fight rather than taking the AJ fight. But it backfired, at least for Deontay, and certainly for the fans as well. Anyway, I'll leave it there. As for Zhilei Zhang and what's next for him, I'll cover that in a separate video. For now, give me your thoughts in the comment section below.